Hi, this is Corey Franklin with Remembering the Past, a show where we talk about people who've died recently who've had a profound effect on our history, our society, and our culture. Our first subject definitely had a profound effect on our culture. She was Virginia Johnson, who died recently at the age of 88. Virginia Johnson and her husband at the time, William Masters, were the two top sex researchers in the United States during the late 60s and the decade of the 70s. There wasn't much sex research going on in the United States until right after World War II, when Alfred Kinsey published his momentous Kinsey reports at Indiana University in the late 1940s and early 1950s, and they were groundbreaking. The Kinsey reports on male and female sexual behavior were huge bestsellers. They changed culture in the United States, and they made sex a respectable subject of scientific inquiry. Masters and Johnson at Washington University in St. Louis picked up on this, and they made their own name with an approach that was based on physiology as opposed to the behavioral-based approach of Kinsey. Their books were also huge bestsellers, not quite as influential as Kinsey, but close. Here's a report on Virginia Johnson from CBS.
Award-winning sex researcher Virginia Johnson has died. She was one half of the pioneering team of Masters and Johnson. As Jan Crawford reports, they brought a taboo subject into the open in the name of science.
In the late 1950s, Virginia Johnson was a twice-divorced mother of two with no college degree, working as a secretary at Washington University in St. Louis. There, she met obstetrician William Masters and became his lover and research assistant.
They made it acceptable in polite society to talk about aspects of sexuality by using the medical terms, the clinical terms. They really changed the whole conversation in America about sex.
Journalist Thomas Mayer wrote their biography, Masters of Sex.
Their studies underline the power of female sexuality, and she was a big part of that.
Their research, now the subject of a Showtime series, was possible because Johnson personally recruited hundreds of women to have sex in their St. Louis clinic while hooked up to machines that measured their physical responses. It was the first time scientific methods were applied to the study of sex. Their 1966 book, Human Sexual Response, became a bestseller and made them household names. They authored several more books, but one of their last, released during the height of the AIDS epidemic, was condemned for its alarmist tone and misinformation about HIV transmission.
When the future of a population is perhaps to some degree at stake, then I think that there has to be a very definitive, very strong stand taken to reverse those years of complacency.
The couple married in 1971. But Masters left her for another woman and divorced Johnson after 20 years of marriage. He died in 2001.
She became really the genius behind their sex therapy, which revolutionized the way in which sex clinics throughout America and throughout the world treated married couples that were having difficulties in the bedroom.
Virginia Johnson, a sex pioneer who got overtaken by the sexual revolution. We're going to move on now to Emile Griffith. Emile Griffith died recently at the age of 75. He was one of the top welterweights and middleweights in the world in the late 50s and early 60s. He was the first champion from the Virgin Islands, but his career will forever be known by one fight, and that fight was the welterweight championship in 1962 against Benny Kid Paret. The backstory is that Griffith had been the welterweight champion of the world, and Paret took the title from him. In the rematch for the title at the weigh-in, Paret, who was from Cuba, called Griffith a maricón. Maricón is a slang Spanish word for homosexual and might be compared to sissy or queer or even faggot. It was well known in the boxing community, although not publicly, that Emile Griffith was bisexual. In those days, boxing was still a popular sport on television, and a national TV audience watched Griffith in the 12th round beat Paret savagely. Paret collapsed and died 10 days later. The fight was responsible for taking boxing off television for almost 20 years. Griffith maintained for many years that the beating was not in response to the name-calling, but that's one of those things that we're never going to know for sure. Here's an ESPN report on Emile Griffith.
Hall of Fame boxer and former middleweight and welterweight champion Emile Griffith has died at the age of 75. Griffith was the very first world champion born in the U.S. Virgin Islands. He was also openly bisexual. I'm Kerry Chow, joined by ESPN boxing analyst Nigel Collins. Nigel, what was the cause of death?
Emile had been in failing health for some years now. He had Parkinson's syndrome, similar to what Ali had, where you slowly deteriorate, although there's never any hard evidence. Most likely it was caused by his ring career.
What will Griffith be remembered for?
Well, sadly, he'll probably be remembered for his fight with Paret when Paret died. But that's really not fair. Emile Griffith was a great fighter, as you mentioned, a true world champion in 2 divisions, a great ambassador for the sport who traveled all over the globe boxing. And maybe more important than that, he was a wonderful human being, very warm, very friendly. Even when he was rolling in the money, he was exactly the same way. So he was a special guy beyond being a special boxer.
Now, he was bisexual and he was open about it. However, he didn't talk about that much. Now, was this a matter of him being before his time even?
Well, it was an open secret, but he wasn't really open. You know what I mean? He never came out officially until a biography was written about him about 10 years ago. So it was one of those things where everybody in boxing knew, but it wasn't something that the writers were writing about or the TV commentators were talking about. I think maybe Emile was afraid to come out because he thought it might hurt his career, or perhaps his advisors, more than him, thought it might hurt his career. But I honestly don't think it would have, not that much anyway. The backlash would have been minimum. He was a great fighter, and boxing fans respect great fighters for what they can do in the ring, not for their sexual orientation.
In the history of boxing, where would he rank?
I think he's already in the Hall of Fame. He beat a number of other Hall of Famers like Dick Tiger, Nina Benevenuti, Louis Rodriguez. I would say of the multi-champions at one role, I think he's in the top 20 of all time. Really a special fighter. His career lasted an awful long time, and even when he was past his prime, he could still handle most of the other fighters.
Griffith retired in 1977. His overall record was 85-24-2 with 23 knockouts.
Okay, 2 things about that report. First, I saw Emile Griffith fight a number of times on television before they took it off the TV. He was a wonderful fighter, excellent fighter, but calling him in the top 20, that's pushing it a little bit. I don't think he was that good. Second, it's just nonsense that had he come out as bisexual back then, it wouldn't have hurt his career. It would have killed his career. That's applying today's standards to the early 1960s. There is no way the fighting public would have accepted a bisexual fighter in the 1960s. Okay, having said that, let's go to the tape of the 12th round knockout. This is Griffith sending Paret to the canvas. And I saw this one on the Saturday night fight.
This is probably the tamest round of the entire fight. That's there. There's Paret was dropped again. Griffith dropped him. Paret against the ropes, almost helpless. A minute to go. And they're going to stop it. They're going to stop it as Paret sails to the canvas. Paret goes down from sheer exhaustion. Look at him there. As his handler's got his mouthpiece out. Dr. Schiff is coming over to look at him. Paret has collapsed from exhaustion from that beating on the ropes. And Dr. Alexander Schiff of the commission is trying to get at him. The fight has been stopped, and the winner and new champion is Emile Griffith, but we're more concerned about the condition of Benny Kid Paret than we are about the title at the moment. We're going to have an interview with the winner. The time is 2:09 of this round. We'll have an interview with Emile Griffith as soon as we find out how Benny Kid Paret is.
The time, 2 minutes and 9 seconds of the 12th round. The winner by a knockout, and once again, welterweight champion of the world.
Yeah, it was Emile Griffith. That wasn't exhaustion that put Benny Kid Paret down. That was bleeding in the brain. Here's how famous that fight was. Back when Norman Mailer was still a respectable writer and he was doing his macho thing about boxing, he was at ringside, and he actually did a commentary on the flurry of punches that Emile Griffith threw at Benny Kid Paret.
Griffith, making a pent-up, whispering sound all the while he attacked, the right hand whipping like a piston rod which has broken through the crankcase, or like a baseball bat demolishing a pumpkin. Over the referee's face came a look of woe, as if some spasm had passed its way through him, and then he leaped on Griffith to pull him away. It was the act of a brave man. Griffith was uncontrollable. His trainer leaped into the ring, his manager, his cut man. There were 4 people holding Griffith, but he was off on an orgy. He had left the garden. If he had been able to break loose, he would have hurled Paret to the floor and wailed on him there.
Emile Griffith, a great fighter and a very nice guy. In fact, he lost a lot of his aggressiveness. He was never the same fighter after that bout. We're going to close with our feature tonight. It's Willie Louis, who died at the age of 76. And Willie Louis was born Willie Reed in Greenwood, Mississippi. In 1955, as a brave 18-year-old, Willie Reed testified at the trial of the killers of Emmett Till. The murder of Emmett Till, as you may know, was one of the most important civil rights events of the 20th century. Till was the 14-year-old boy from Chicago who went down to Mississippi to visit his grandfather and was murdered brutally by several white men. The white men were tried but never convicted, even though an all-white jury acquitted the killers in an hour, and it took an act of bravery by Willie Reed to testify in the hostile atmosphere. Here's Moses Newson, an African-American reporter who covered the trial as a young man.
Mississippi, as you know, was a place that everybody considered probably the worst place for black people to live as far as civil rights was concerned. Ever since the school desegregation ruling in 1954, Mississippi and a lot of the South said they weren't going to do it. And of course, one of the big arguments throughout the South at this time was that black guys would be trying to hang out with white girls and that sort of thing. During this period, Emmett Till came down from Chicago to visit with relatives there in Money, Mississippi. He went to this grocery store that was run by Bryant and his wife. He's supposed to have whistled at her. Bryant and his half-brother Milam were away at the time. Soon after they got back, about the 28th of August, they went out to Mose Wright's house at gunpoint. They kidnapped him and took him away. They had beaten that kid up, something awful. And when they finished beating him, then they shot him in the head. Jet magazine ran a picture of it, and it traveled all over the United States and all over the world. It was one of the most gruesome pictures you ever saw. That sort of set the stage for the trial that was going to take place. As soon as I heard about the story, I went down to Money. First day we got there, we got to meet Sheriff H.C. Strider. He's one of those big guys who ran a plantation there. He was one of those sheriffs who had a reputation of being able to handle black people there. First thing he told us when we got there is there's not going to be any integration here. The white guys will sit over at this table, this press table here. We don't have a press table for you guys. I've got 4 seats out here in the audience with the blacks where you could sit. Well, it was the biggest group of black reporters I had seen in any civil rights coverage, and I had covered quite a few of them. So we had a lot of people there, and 4 seats weren't going to cut it, you know. Congressman Diggs, Charles Diggs from Detroit, had got okay from the judge to come down and be an observer at the trial. They appealed to the judge, and eventually they set up a table off to the side for us. The next thing we found out is that the sheriff, who normally would be working with the prosecutors, was working with the defense lawyers. He hadn't taken time to come up with a lot of witnesses to try to convict these guys. 3 people from the NAACP decided they were going to go out and try to scare up some witnesses. I was going along as the pool reporter. So we changed into clothing and put on some of the kind of clothing that the people who work on the plantations down there would have been wearing. We back out in these woods trying to scare up witnesses, you know. And I got to thinking, man, you know, they don't convict white people down here for killing black people. And here we are out here looking for witnesses to try to convict somebody. And it might be a better place I could be, you know. But we did scare up a couple of witnesses. One of them, Willie Reed, was a pretty important witness in the case. He had gone by that night and heard some screaming and heard some of the noise and that kind of stuff. And he had seen Bryant come out and get water to take back into the building where they were beating up the boy. He made a pretty good witness, but they didn't take an awful lot of time with the trial. I think that was one of the pivotal stories in the civil rights movement. I think this played a lot into the situation in Montgomery, Alabama, later that same year, when Rosa Parks refused to give up her bus seat so a white passenger could sit down. I don't think that would have happened the way it did unless and because of the Till case. People were really angry and upset about the situation. That was a case that shook up a lot of people. Black people decided that if this is the kind of thing they're going to do to our kids, and it's time for us to start being a little more bold in what we do to try to get this monkey off our backs.
Willie Reed changed his name to Willie Louis. He was smuggled up to Chicago where he lived the rest of his life. He worked in a South Side hospital. He had a nervous breakdown. But before the end of his life, he told Ed Bradley in 60 Minutes about his testimony at the Emmett Till trial.
Another key witness was an 18-year-old sharecropper named Willie Reed, who said that on the morning after Emmett Till was abducted, he saw Emmett on a truck with 6 people: Roy Bryant, J.W. Milam, 2 other white men, and 2 black men who worked for Milam. Soon after, Reed said he saw the same truck parked in front of a barn managed at the time by Milam's brother, and heard the screams of a young boy he presumed was Emmett Till. Today, at age 67, Reed says he still cannot get those sounds out of his mind.
I heard the screaming, beating, and beating. And I said to myself, I said, man, them beating somebody in that barn. I can hear it beating. The licks, I can hear the licks.
You could hear the licks?
Yes, you could.
According to Willie Reed and another witness, 4 white men came out of the barn, including Milam, who walked right up to Reed carrying a .45 caliber pistol.
Milam was coming out of the barn, so he actually said, listen, did you all hear anything? And I said, no, I haven't heard anything.
Why would you say that? I mean, you had heard something. You had heard screaming, you had heard somebody being beaten.
Yeah, I saw somebody being beaten. But then you see Milam come on with like I said, with the khaki pants on and a green shirt and 45 on his side. Then he asked you, what you gonna say?
You didn't hear anything.
I didn't hear anything.
You knew that's what he wanted to hear.
Right.
When they found the body, did you put 2 and 2 together and think that what you had heard going on in that barn, that was Emmett Till?
I'm sure. I was sure then.
Fearing for his life after testifying against Milam and Bryant, Willie Reed was smuggled out of Mississippi. He went to Chicago, where he suffered a nervous breakdown and was hospitalized. You're a good man. You had a lot of courage for an 18-year-old. I think there are a lot of people who would have walked away from it. Wouldn't have said a word.
No, I couldn't walk away from that like that. Because Emmett was 14, probably never been to Mississippi in his life. And he come to visit his grandfather. And they killed him. I mean, so that's not right. I saw, when they in the picture, they saw his body, what it was like. Then I knew that I couldn't say no.
Willie Louis was an unsung civil rights hero. I'm going to close on that note. I want to thank my producer, Sid Tepps. We're going to close tonight with the greatest song ever written about Southern racism and one of the most famous performances of the 20th century by Lady Day Billie Holiday. The song is Strange Fruit, and it refers to the lynching of African Americans in the South. It's testimony to the murder of Emmett Till, and we play it tonight in honor of Willie Louis, that brave 18-year-old who had the courage to testify.
Southern trees bear strange fruit, blood on the leaf and blood at the root, black bodies swinging in the southern breeze, strange fruit hanging from the poplar tree.